A question, we'll start with you, Mr. Perle, about terrorism. And what is terrorism? Does 170-plus dead Palestinians killed by settlers and Zionist troops qualify as terrorism? How about 700-plus dead South African youth in 1976 in South Africa? Is this terrorism? Does 40,000 dead Nicaraguans qualify as terrorism? If not, please explain.
Is that applause, I take it, is for the question and not for my answer. Let me say this. Whatever terrorism is, I would not define it in such a manner as to confuse acts by the PLO against non-combatants, frequently children, with action taken by George Washington in the American War of Independence. Now, it does seem to me that the essence of the concept of terrorism is an attack against non-combatants. That is, an attack against people who are not involved, not directly parties to a conflict. And one of the things that I object to in the analogy suggested by Professor Chomsky is the failure to recognize that when the PLO attacks a bus full of civilians, including children, and murders them, that is not in any way to be compared with a struggle for independence.
Okay. May I comment on that one?
Well,
sure.
I've given a definition of terrorism. You can apply it to those situations.
May I?
Sure.
I think that here again I'll unfortunately refer to U.S. documents, which I think are quite good. The U.S. Code has an official definition of terrorism. I think it's a pretty good one. State Department and Army documents, for example, the Army Manual Countering Terrorism, have good definitions of terrorism. I think we ought to keep to it. Basically, without quoting all the words, it comes down to just what you said. The threat or use of force to coerce and intimidate civilian populations. That's terrorism. Now, that would it would include, in fact, George Washington's actions. For example, they perhaps went beyond terrorism, like the destruction of the Iroquois civilization in 1779, the rampaging of Green's armies, and so on. I don't say that particularly critically. I really don't know of any national movement that didn't involve terrorism. But let's keep up until today. I agree with you that when the PLO attacks civilians, that's terrorism. Similarly, when the United States directs its proxy army, as it's called in internal documents again, when it directs its proxy army to attack soft targets, the words of General John Galvin testifying to Congress a year or two ago, to attack soft targets and not to, going on, to duke it out with the Sandinistas directly, that is to avoid defended targets and attack soft targets, that's terrorism. When Charles Redmond of the State Department spokesman endorses publicly the attack of our proxy forces against agricultural collectives on the grounds that there are some people with arms defending them, that's advocacy of terrorism, just as it would be if Gaddafi endorsed the attack of the attacks by the PLO against Israeli collectives, which are far better armed than the cooperatives that we're attacking. All that's terrorism. In fact, when former CIA Director Stansfield Turner testified before Congress in 1985 on this, he simply referred to our attack against Nicaragua as terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism. That's giving us the benefit of the doubt, I should say. If you take the World Court decision seriously, it may pass beyond terrorism to the much more serious crime of aggression, unlawful use of force. But giving the U.S. the benefit of the doubt, it's large-scale terrorism. When the PLO attacks a bus and kills civilians, that's terrorism. When Israel bombs civilian targets in the Bekaa Valley, killing with hundreds of maybe 400 casualties, including children killed in a bombed-out schoolhouse, mosques destroyed, markets destroyed, and so on, that's terrorism. In fact, there's plenty of terrorism in the world. By and large, the terrorism, it's a roughly fair generalization, that the more powerful the entity involved, the more terrorism it carries out. There are exceptions, but there's no doubt that we're doing quite well in that conflict. I might point out that we're one of the few countries in the world that's officially committed to terrorism. There are other terrorist states, but I want to stress that the United States has an official commitment to terrorism. The attack against the commitment to attack soft targets, such as agricultural cooperatives, that's an official commitment to terrorism. In fact, if you take a look at the U.S. Army published manuals on low-intensity conflict, the policy we're officially committed to, you will notice that the definition of low-intensity conflict happens to be almost word for word the definition of terrorism. The use of measures short of aggression to coerce and intimidate the population. That's low-intensity conflict. Take a look at the definitions. This is it's not that we're the only terrorist state, but we're ranked rather high in the competition for major terrorist power.
Mr. Perle?
I don't have anything to add to that.